Harold Meeks had been the janitor at Lincoln Elementary for 34 years. He mopped floors before dawn, earned $12 an hour, and never once called in sick. When he found a newborn crying in a cardboard box on the gymnasium floor, he took her home. When a little girl's mother died and nobody came forward, he petitioned for custody. When a child with bruises under her sleeves ran from her foster home and hid in his school basement, he adopted her. He raised all three on a janitor's wage and never asked anyone for a thing. Then the school district filed a lawsuit claiming he'd stolen $47,000 in school resources. Harold sat in the courtroom in his one good suit. No lawyer, no money to fight. Then the doors opened, and what walked in was something that courtroom had never seen. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harold sat at his kitchen table with the paper spread out in front of him, reading the same paragraph for the fourth time. The words didn't change. Civil complaint, misappropriation of district resources. $47,000, his name printed in capital letters at the top of every page. He set the papers down and looked at his hands. Calloused, scarred across the knuckles, a permanent crease of grime under the left thumbnail that no amount of scrubbing could fix. Those hands had unclogged every toilet in the building, rewired the cafeteria lights twice, and patched the gymnasium roof with materials he bought himself because the work order sat on someone's desk for 3 months. Now those same hands were accused of stealing. The kitchen smelled like yesterday's coffee. 3 chairs sat around the table, none of them matching. One was oak with a ladder back that Harold found at a garage sale when Grace was 2. One was a metal folding chair he brought home from the school after they replaced the cafeteria furniture. The third was a wooden stool that Lily painted blue when she was 12. His brown Carhartt jacket hung on the hook by the door. On the dresser in his bedroom, 2 photographs sat side by side. Daniel at 3, gap-toothed and grinning, taken 6 weeks before the meningitis, and a school photo of 3 girls in matching jumpers that Harold had ironed at 5 that morning because the wrinkles bothered him. He picked up the phone and dialed. Grace answered on the second ring. Harold. She was the only one of the 3 who called him by his first name. Nina called him Dad. Lily called him Pop. Grace had tried both when she was little and settled on Harold, which he secretly loved because his mother used to say his name exactly like that. Hey, Gracie. You busy? I'm going through case files. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Harold. He rubbed his forehead. The district sent some paperwork over. It's probably nothing. What kind of paperwork? He looked at the pile on the table. $47,000. Purchase orders with his name typed at the bottom. Dates stretching back 2 decades. They're saying I took some things from the school. The line went quiet. Took things, Grace said. What things? Supplies, equipment. They've got a long list, Gracie, but I didn't take anything. You know that. I know that. What exactly does the complaint say? It says misappropriation. That's the word they used. Who filed it? Calloway, the new superintendent. Another pause. The one who's been cutting the maintenance budget. That's him. How much are they claiming? Harold hesitated. $47,000. Grace didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was different, sharper, professional. Don't talk to anyone. Don't sign anything. Don't answer calls from the district. Gracie, it's just I'm coming home. You passed the bar 2 months ago. You've got interviews lined up. Don't throw all that away over some paperwork. Harold, I'm already packing. He opened his mouth to argue, but the line clicked. She was gone. Harold set the phone down and sat in the quiet. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. He'd been meaning to replace that ballast for months. He pulled his spiral notebook from the junk drawer and wrote, "Kitchen fluorescent ballast. Replace." Then he put the notebook back and sat down again. For the first time since he'd read the lawsuit, he felt afraid. Not of losing. Harold had lost before. He lost Daniel. He lost his wife when she packed a bag and left without a note. He lost any chance at a comfortable life the morning he heard a baby crying in an empty gymnasium and decided to pick her up. He was afraid of what this would do to the girls. The parking lot was empty at 4:30 in the morning, 24 years ago. Harold pulled in and cut the engine on his old Ford, the one with the rusted bed and a heater that only worked on the driver's side. He sat for a moment, thermos in one hand, keyring in the other. He liked this part of the day. The stillness. The school dark and quiet. Just Harold and the building and a list of things that needed doing. He let himself in through the side entrance and walked the main hallway by flashlight. First stop was always the gymnasium. A pipe had been leaking behind the bleachers, and he wanted to check the patch job from Friday. He pushed open the gym doors and stopped. Something was crying. Not a cat, not the wind through the old ventilation ducts. A baby. Harold stood in the doorway. His flashlight beam cut across the hard wood and landed on the far corner. The sound bounced off the walls and came back doubled. He crossed the floor slowly. His work boots echoed with every step. The crying got louder. A cardboard box, brown about the size of a case of copy paper, a blanket inside, blue with yellow ducks, and a baby, tiny, red-faced, screaming with everything she had. Harold knelt down. His knees cracked against the floor. He pointed the flashlight at the blanket and saw a piece of lined paper, safety pinned to the edge, handwritten, 5 words. Please take care of her. No name, no explanation. Just a request from someone who was already gone. Harold looked at the baby. She couldn't have been more than a few days old. Her fists were clenched, her eyes squeezed shut, and every breath was a howl. He hadn't held a baby since Daniel. That last time was at the hospital. Harold was telling his son a story about a dog who could fly. The monitors started beeping faster. Then they stopped. Harold's hands were shaking. He reached into the box and picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. He held her against his chest, and his hand covered her entire back. Her head fit in his palm. "Hey," he said. "Hey now, it's all right." She didn't stop crying, but she turned her face into his jacket and her fists unclenched, just a little. Harold stood in the dark gymnasium holding someone else's baby, and he had no idea what to do. So he did the only thing he could think of. He kept talking. "My name's Harold. I'm the janitor here. I fix things, that's what I do. So let's get you fixed up, all right?" The baby made a sound that wasn't quite a cry, more like a hiccup. Harold took that as agreement. He carried her to the front office and called the police. They came in 12 minutes. Then the ambulance. Then social services. A woman with a clipboard and tired eyes showed up around 7, by which time Harold had wrapped the baby in his Carhartt jacket and moved to the custodial closet, because it was the warmest room in the building. The paramedics checked the baby over and said she was healthy. Cold, hungry, but healthy. "We'll find placement," the caseworker told Harold. "Give us a few days. Where's she going tonight? We have emergency foster options. I can take her now." Harold looked down. The baby had stopped crying 20 minutes earlier and fallen asleep against his chest. Her breathing was so light he kept checking to make sure. "I've got a spare room," he said. The caseworker studied him, a 43-year-old janitor in a brown work jacket, holding a newborn in a custodial closet. "Mr. Meeks, that's very generous, but we have procedures. I know you do. I'm just saying I've got a room. It was my son's." Something shifted in her face. "Your son. He passed. Long time ago." She looked at the baby, then back at Harold. "A few days," she said. "We'll have placement by Thursday." Thursday's fine. Thursday came and went. Harold's house on Birch Street had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with a window that didn't close all the way. The second bedroom still had the crib in it, the one with the mobile of wooden stars Harold carved by hand, a stuffed bear on the mattress, a stack of picture books on the shelf. He hadn't opened that door since the funeral, and he didn't plan to. The night he brought the baby home, he opened it. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he cleaned the crib, washed the sheets, laid the baby down. She slept for 2 hours. Then she woke up screaming. Harold fed her formula from a bottle the caseworker had given him, burped her, changed her, walked her back and forth across the small room until she settled. An hour and a half later, she was screaming again. He did it all over. By dawn, he'd slept 40 minutes. He had formula on his shirt and a crick in his neck from the rocking chair. He stood in the kitchen making coffee and realized it was the first morning in a long time that he hadn't woken up dreading the day. The few days turned into a week. The week turned into 2. The caseworker called with updates that weren't updates. Emergency placements were full. Foster families had waiting lists. Was Harold managing? Did he need supplies? Harold needed everything. He didn't say so. He went to the dollar store and bought diapers, bottles, burp cloths, and a plastic tub to bathe her in. The principal, a woman who'd known Harold since he started, let him bring the baby to work. She didn't put it in writing. She just said, "Use the back office. Keep the door shut if the board comes through." Harold set up a corner of the custodial closet with a blanket and a car seat he bought at a thrift store for $6. He mopped the hallways with the baby sleeping 10 feet away. When she cried, he picked her up, shifted her onto his hip, and kept working one-handed. The teachers noticed. Of course they did. The second-grade teacher brought a bag of her daughter's old baby clothes. The music teacher dropped off a box of formula. The lunch cook started making an extra plate and leaving it on the counter in the custodial closet, without saying a word. Nobody asked Harold for a long-term plan. Nobody told him he was in over his head. They just watched a man who had been moving through his days with nothing behind his eyes suddenly come back to something. He named the baby Grace, after his mother. She'd been a school cook in Virginia who raised 4 children on a salary that barely covered rent and never once complained about it. When Harold was 10 and getting picked on for wearing the same shoes every day, she sat him down and said, "You're enough, Harold. Don't let anyone tell you different." Harold figured if this baby was going to carry anyone's name, it should be hers. 4 months in, the caseworker called one last time. "Mr. Meeks, we still don't have placement. No one has come forward. I have to be honest with you. The chances of a newborn abandonment case resolving with a biological family reunion at this point are very low." "What happens to her?" "She goes into the foster system." Harold was quiet for a moment. "What if I keep her?" "You'd have to petition for custody. There would be a hearing, background check, home visits. How do I start?" The hearing was 3 weeks later. Harold sat in the courtroom in the one suit he owned, a Navy two-piece from the Salvation Army that hung too wide across the shoulders. He'd polished his shoes the night before with a rag and cooking oil, because he didn't have shoe polish. The judge looked at the file, then at Harold. "Mr. Meeks, you're asking this court to grant you permanent custody of an infant." "Yes, sir." "You work as a custodian." "Yes, sir." "And you're proposing to raise this child alone." "Yes, sir." "Mr. Meeks, have you considered the financial requirements, medical costs, schooling, the basic necessities of raising a child from infancy?" Harold sat up straight. The suit didn't fit, but he filled it with everything he had. "Your Honor, I know what I am. I mop floors and I fix pipes. I don't make a lot of money. But that baby was left on my floor, in my building. I've been feeding her and changing her and sitting up with her every night for 4 months. Nobody else came forward. Not one person." He paused. "She needs someone. I'm here." The caseworker took the stand. "In 4 months, we have not received a single inquiry about this child. No biological family has come forward. Mr. Meeks has been her sole caregiver since the night she was found. The child is healthy, gaining weight, and meeting all developmental milestones. And in your professional assessment, he's the most attentive caregiver I've worked with in my time doing this." The judge granted temporary custody that afternoon. Full custody came 6 months later after 3 home visits and a background check that came back spotless because Harold Meeks had never broken a law in his life. He walked out of the courthouse carrying Grace in one arm and a folder of legal papers in the other. A woman from the clerk's office held the door for him. "You've got a good heart, Mr. Meeks," she said. Harold looked at Grace. She was chewing on the collar of his jacket. "She needs someone," he said. "That's all it is." That was a long time ago. Grace took her first steps in Harold's kitchen. She sat at that table every night doing homework from first grade through senior year. She argued her way through high school, got through college on scholarships and 3 part-time jobs, and passed the bar exam 2 months ago. Harold sat in the back row when she was sworn in, wearing the same Navy suit. It still didn't fit. Now Harold sat at that same table, and a stack of papers said he was a thief. He heard a car door outside at 11:15. Headlights swept across the kitchen window. Footsteps on the porch. Harold opened the front door. Grace stood on the step with a rolling suitcase and a leather bag over her shoulder. She was wearing a gray suit. Harold noticed that. She looked like a lawyer. "You didn't have to come," he said. She walked past him into the kitchen and stopped when she saw the table, papers everywhere. The complaint. The itemized list. Purchase orders with Harold's name printed at the bottom in neat type. Grace set her bag down, pulled out the oak chair, and sat. She picked up the first page and started reading. Bent forward, one hand turning pages, the other flat on the table. She used to sit in that exact position doing her homework while Harold mopped the floor around her. She looked up. "Tell me everything." Harold told her everything he knew, which wasn't much. The letter came with no warning. No phone call first. Just a stack of papers in a manila envelope. Grace read every page. The complaint was over 40 pages, and she went through it the way she went through everything, slow and thorough. Harold sat across from her and drank cold coffee. She looked up an hour later. "Harold, these are specific. They've got dates, purchase order numbers, dollar amounts. They're claiming you ordered supplies that never made it to the school. Tools, lumber, paint, light fixtures. I signed requisition forms every month. That was part of my job. These say you ordered materials that were never delivered. Over 2 decades worth. Everything I ordered went into that building. Every bolt, every can of paint. I kept records. Gracie, what kind of records? Notebooks. I wrote down every repair I made, every supply I ordered, every light bulb I changed." Grace looked at him. "Where are these notebooks?" "In the hall closet. I've got decades of them." Grace almost smiled. Then she looked back at the papers and her face went flat. "Who is Richard Calloway?" "Superintendent. Showed up a while back. And before that, the old superintendent retired. Calloway replaced her." "What do you know about him?" "Not much. Wears pressed shirts, talks smooth, cut the maintenance budget his first month. I mentioned to the principal that supplies were running low even though the budget kept going up. 2 weeks later, this showed up." Grace was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Tell me about the school. Tell me about all of it." Harold looked at his hands. "Where do you want me to start?" "The beginning." So Harold talked, not about the lawsuit, about the building. The hallways he mopped before dawn. The heaters he fixed with parts from the hardware store. The roof he patched himself. The custodial closet where he kept his tools, his notebooks, and for a while a car seat with a baby in it. And the closet where, every afternoon, a little girl used to show up with her homework and ask if Harold had any crackers. Nina's mother was a woman named Carmen who worked double shifts at the town diner. Breakfast through close, 6 days a week. She had dark circles under her eyes and rough hands from the dish pit, and every morning she walked Nina to school in clean clothes with her hair braided tight. Nina was 5, quiet, small for her age. She sat in the back of the first-grade classroom and didn't raise her hand because her English wasn't perfect, and some of the kids laughed. Every afternoon at 3:15, when the bell rang and the hallways cleared, Nina appeared at Harold's custodial closet. She didn't knock. She just showed up and sat on the overturned bucket by the door. Mr. Missivhelt. "Harold, do you have crackers?" Harold always had crackers. He started keeping a box of saltines in the closet after the second time she came. He'd hand her a few, and she'd eat them one at a time while working through her math. "What's 7 plus 8? She'd ask. "What do you think it is?" She'd count on her fingers. 15. There you go. This went on for months. Harold never asked why she didn't go to the after-school program. He figured it out. Carmen couldn't afford it. The diner didn't let her go until 6, and there was nobody else. So every afternoon, Harold and Nina sat in the custodial closet. She did her homework. He sorted supplies and answered her questions. Sometimes she fell asleep on the bucket, and Harold would carry her to the front office and wait for Carmen to pull up in her old sedan, still in her diner uniform, smelling like grease and coffee. "Thank you, Mr. Harold," Carmen said every time. "I don't know what I'd do. She's no trouble. She talks about you at home. Says you're the smartest man in the school." Harold laughed. "She hasn't met the science teacher." Carmen smiled. She had a tired smile, but it was real. The accident was on a Thursday in February. Icy roads. A delivery truck crossed the center line on the highway. Carmen was driving home from the diner. She died before the ambulance arrived. Nina was in the custodial closet when the principal came to find her. Harold saw the principal's face and knew he'd seen that look before. He'd worn it himself, standing in a hospital hallway with everything falling away under his feet. "Nina, honey," the principal said. "Can you come with me for a minute?" Nina looked at Harold. He nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart. I'll be right here," they told her in the principal's office. Harold stood outside the door and heard her start crying. Not loud. Quiet. The kind that doesn't have words yet. He waited. After 20 minutes, the principal came out. "Social services is on the way. We've called everyone on Carmen's emergency contacts. Anyone coming?" "Not so far." Harold went into the office. Nina was sitting in the big chair behind the desk, her feet dangling above the floor. Her homework was still in her lap. Her face was wet, but she'd gone silent. Harold pulled up a chair and sat down next to her. "Mr. Purfew." "Mr. Harold?" "Yeah, Nina. My mom is dead." "I know, sweetheart. What's going to happen to me?" Harold didn't have a good answer, so he said the only true thing he could. "You're going to be okay." "How do you know?" "Because I'm going to make sure of it." He petitioned for custody that same week. The caseworker was different this time, a young man in a necktie with a folder full of forms. Harold filled out every one. He already knew the process. "Mr. Meeks, you already have one child in your care." "I know. And your income hasn't changed." "I know that too. Taking on a second child is going to be..." "She's been coming to my closet every afternoon for months. She eats crackers and does her homework and falls asleep on a bucket. Her mother just died, and nobody came to get her. I'm not asking you if it's practical. I'm asking you to let me take her home." The caseworker looked at Harold for a long time. Then he started filling out the paperwork. Grace was 2 when Nina moved in. Harold shifted Grace's things to his bedroom and gave Nina her own room. Grace fussed for one night and then stopped because Grace adjusted to everything. Nina was harder. She didn't talk for the first week. She sat at the table and stared at her plate. Harold made her scrambled eggs and toast every morning because she told him that's what her mother used to make. On the 8th day, Harold came downstairs and found Nina standing at the stove. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Making eggs." She cracked one into the pan. "You do them wrong. Mom always added milk." Harold watched a 5-year-old teach him how to scramble eggs. They sat at the table together, Nina in the metal folding chair, and ate breakfast in silence. It was the first full meal she'd eaten since Carmen died. Then came Lily. Grace was 4 and Nina was 7 when Harold found her. He was mopping the first floor hallway at 6 in the morning and heard something from the basement. Not a pipe, not a rat, something heavier. He opened the basement door and went down with his flashlight. Behind the old boiler, tucked between the wall and a stack of broken desks, a girl was curled up on the concrete floor. She was 8. She was wearing long sleeves in the middle of June. "Hey there," Harold said. She didn't move. He crouched down. "My name's Harold. I'm the janitor." "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Are you hungry?" She didn't answer, but her eyes moved to the thermos in his hand. "I've got coffee in here, but that's probably not your speed. How about I go upstairs and get you something to eat?" She stared at him. The look in her eyes wasn't fear. It was something past fear. A child who had stopped expecting anything good. "I'll be right back," Harold said. "I promise." He went upstairs, heated soup on the hot plate in his closet, grabbed a blanket from the lost and found, and brought both down to the basement. She was still there. She hadn't moved. Harold set the soup beside her and draped the blanket over her shoulders. Then he sat on the floor a few feet away and waited. She picked up the soup after a while and drank it slowly. "What's your name?" Harold asked. "Nothing." "That's okay. You don't have to tell me." She finished the soup, set the can down, and pulled the blanket tighter. Then she closed her eyes. Harold called the police. They identified her as Lily, 8 years old, in a foster placement 2 miles from the school. When the officers asked to see her arms, she pulled up her sleeves. Harold stepped out to give her privacy. The look on the officer's face when he came back said everything. The foster parents were arrested that afternoon. Lily went into emergency placement with a new family. Harold went home, sat at his kitchen table, and didn't touch his dinner. 3 days later, the caseworker called. The emergency placement isn't working. She won't speak. She won't eat. She keeps asking for the janitor. Bring her here, Harold said. Lily arrived with a garbage bag of clothes and a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. She sat at the kitchen table in the third chair, the wooden stool, and didn't say a word. Grace sat next to her and colored. Nina brought her a plate of scrambled eggs with milk, the way Carmen used to make them. Lily didn't eat. She didn't talk. For 2 weeks she moved through the house without making a sound, and Harold let her. He didn't push. He didn't ask questions. He made meals, washed her clothes, and left the hallway light on at night because he noticed she slept with her door open. Then one morning, Harold was in the kitchen making coffee. Lily appeared in the doorway in pajamas that didn't fit, holding the stuffed rabbit by its one remaining ear. "Mr. Harold, morning, Lily." She stood there a long time. Harold poured his coffee and waited. "Can I stay with you forever?" Harold set the mug down. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, you can." He adopted her 4 months later. 3 girls, 3 chairs, 1 paycheck. Harold sold the truck, rode the bus to work, which meant leaving the house at 4 in the morning instead of 4:30. He worked double shifts when they came up and single shifts when they didn't, and either way he put every dollar toward the girls. He ate after they ate. Some nights that meant he didn't eat at all because 3 growing children went through a lot of food on a custodian's salary. He patched their clothes instead of buying new, checked out a book on braiding hair from the library, and practiced on a mop head until he could do it without looking. Never missed a school play. Never missed a conference. Never missed a doctor visit. Cut his own hair with kitchen scissors to save a few bucks. Nobody told him he was doing something remarkable, and Harold never thought he was. When the neighbor asked how he managed 3 kids alone, he just said, "They're good girls." Like they were doing him the favor. Grace looked up from the papers. "Harold, some of these purchase orders, the front door opened before she could finish. Nina stood in the doorway with a duffel bag and her hospital badge still clipped to her scrubs. I drove straight from my shift," she said. She looked at the table. "That's the lawsuit. That's it." Nina dropped her bag by the door, walked over, and hugged Harold. He held on a moment longer than usual. 15 minutes later, Lily came in through the back door the way she always did, carrying a tote bag and a folder of her own. "I brought something," she said. All 3 chairs were filled. Harold stood by the counter and watched them. Grace with the lawsuit papers, Nina reading over her shoulder, Lily pulling photographs from her folder. "Look at this," Lily said. She spread the photos across the table. The school hallway with paint peeling down to bare drywall. A classroom with a dead heater. A bathroom with a cracked sink that had been reported 3 times. A fire exit with a jammed handle. "I've been taking these for months," Lily said. "I was going to file a complaint with the school board about the state of the building. Every quarter, there's more money in the maintenance budget, and every quarter the building gets worse." Grace looked up from the lawsuit. "More money in the budget." A lot more. Nina had been scanning the purchase orders. She stopped on one and held it up next to one of Lily's photos. "Grace," Nina said slowly. "Look at this." Grace took the page. "What about it?" "Look at the date." Grace looked. Her expression changed. "That's from last March. Harold hasn't worked at that school since he retired," Nina said. She looked at Harold, then back at the paper. "He retired 2 years ago." The kitchen went quiet. Grace pulled 5 more purchase orders from the pile, all dated after Harold's retirement, all with his name printed at the bottom, all signed with a signature that looked close to his but wasn't quite right. Harold leaned forward and studied the signatures. "That's not my handwriting," he said quietly. Grace held up the page. Her voice was steady, but her fingers were tight on the paper. "These purchase orders have your name on them, Harold, but you haven't worked there since you retired." She looked at him. "Someone forged your signature." Grace was up before Harold the next morning. When he came into the kitchen at 5, she was at the table with his spiral notebooks stacked in front of her, the lawsuit papers spread alongside. "How long have you been up?" Harold asked. "A while." "Make coffee." Harold made coffee. Grace kept working. She'd pulled every notebook from the hall closet. There were a lot of them, each one dated on the cover in Harold's neat block handwriting, each one filled with daily entries. Repairs completed, supplies ordered, hours worked, every light bulb, every pipe fitting, every gallon of floor wax. "Harold, these are meticulous," Grace said. "I like keeping track. You tracked everything." It was my job. Grace set one of the notebooks next to a purchase order from the lawsuit. "Look at this. Your notebook says you ordered 12 gallons of floor wax in October. The purchase order the district has on file says 30. Harold frowned. "I never ordered 30 gallons. We didn't use that much in a whole season. And here," she pointed, "your notebook says you replaced 4 fluorescent ballasts in November. The district's records show 18. 4 classrooms needed ballasts. I replaced 4. Nina was standing in the doorway, still in the clothes she'd slept in. So someone changed the numbers." Grace nodded. Someone either altered Harold's original orders or submitted entirely new ones under his name. She sat back. "The first 2 decades of records match almost perfectly. Harold's notebooks and the district files line up." Then Calloway took over, and everything changed. "How bad?" Lily asked from the hallway. "Bad. The orders start running higher than Harold's records immediately. Small at first, an extra case of cleaning solution, a few more gallons of paint. By the end, the purchase orders show 3 and 4 times what Harold actually requested." "Where did all that money go?" Nina asked. "That's what I'm going to find out." Grace spent the rest of the morning on her laptop at the kitchen table. Harold tried to get her to eat. She waved him off. He made a sandwich and set it next to her elbow. She ate it without looking up. Around noon, she closed the laptop and said, "Grayfield Services." Everyone looked at her. Every inflated purchase order was fulfilled by a company called Grayfield Services. I pulled it up in the state business registry. She turned the screen so they could see. Grayfield was incorporated about 18 months ago. The registered agent is Calloway's brother-in-law. The room went still. "So Calloway inflated the orders," Nina said. "Routed them through his brother-in-law's company at higher prices, and kept the difference. Over $340,000, Grace said, "based on what I can trace." And when Harold noticed the supply numbers weren't adding up and said something to the principal, Calloway needed him quiet, so he filed a lawsuit accusing Harold of the exact thing Calloway himself was doing. Harold shook his head slowly. "I just told the principal the supplies weren't matching the budget. I wasn't trying to cause trouble." "You didn't cause this," Grace said. "He did. He's been using your name to cover himself." Harold sat there and looked at the table, his notebooks on one side, the fraudulent purchase orders on the other. Decades of honest work lined up against a fabricated paper trail designed to bury him. "What do we do?" he asked. "We go to the school," Lily said. "And I show you what $340,000 worth of missing maintenance looks like." That afternoon, Lily walked them in through the side entrance with her staff key card. The building looked worse than Harold remembered. He'd left it in good shape. Now the paint was peeling in the main hallway. Water stains had spread across the classroom walls. The gymnasium floor, where Harold had found Grace in a cardboard box, had a crack running end to end. Lily led them through the building, pointing. "I reported the cracked sink in the upstairs bathroom 3 times. The fire exit on the east side has been jammed since fall. The heater in my classroom stopped working in November, and they gave me a space heater instead of fixing it." Grace photographed everything on her phone. "This is where the money went," Lily said. She meant the money didn't go here. Thousands of dollars approved for repairs that never happened, routed to a company that existed on paper and nowhere else. Harold ran his hand along the hallway wall. The paint came off on his fingers. He painted this wall twice, on his own time, weekends when the building was empty, because the kids shouldn't have to look at crumbling walls. "Harold," Grace said gently. He wiped his hand on his pants. "I'm fine. Let's go." Word got out. Harold didn't know how. In a town that size, he never did. The neighbor came by the next morning with a casserole dish and a folded piece of paper. "I wrote down everything I can remember," she said. "Every time Harold fixed something on this street. My porch railing, the Garcia family's fence, the church steps down the block. Never charged a penny. She held out the paper. If you need someone to say that in a courtroom, I'll be there. The cook from the diner called that evening. He'd worked alongside Carmen. I remember Harold bringing those girls in for pancakes every Sunday morning. He'd order 3 kids' plates and a coffee for himself. Never ordered food. I started putting extra pancakes on the girls' plates and Harold never said anything about it, but I could tell he noticed. The former principal's widow drove over with an envelope. My husband kept copies of everything, she said. Found this in his filing cabinet. Inside was a letter on school district letterhead, authorizing Harold to use the school kitchen and storage rooms for personal purposes during non-school hours, signed by the principal, dated from when Grace was still a baby. He wrote it because Harold kept trying to pay for the electricity he used heating bottles for the infant. My husband said that was nonsense and put it in writing so Harold would stop worrying. Grace held up the letter. This covers half of what they're accusing him of. Using school resources for personal purposes. Harold had written authorization. If you've made it this far into Harold's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. 2 days before the trial, a letter arrived from Calloway's attorney. Grace read it at the kitchen table while Harold mopped the floor, which didn't need mopping but which Harold mopped anyway because that was what Harold did when he was anxious. It's a settlement offer, Grace said. Harold stopped. What kind of offer? They want you to accept a $5,000 penalty and sign a statement admitting to unauthorized use of school property. In exchange, they dropped the full complaint. $5,000. You wouldn't have to go to trial. It would be over. Harold leaned on the mop handle. $5,000 was real money. It was more than a month's worth of what he used to make, and it would be done. No courtroom, no lawyers, no risk. But it came with a statement, his name next to the word unauthorized, an admission, in writing, that he'd done something wrong. It would sit in a file somewhere and anyone who looked would see it, and nobody would read the fine print. He thought about it for a long time. Harold, Grace said. She was watching him. I'm thinking. Can I say something? He looked at her. When I was in law school, I wanted to quit. 3 times. The classes, the debt, the feeling like I didn't belong there. Every time I called you, you said the same thing. Harold was quiet. You said, you finish what you start, Gracie. The easy road and the right road aren't the same thing. She set the letter down on the table. You taught us that. All 3 of us. You taught us to never take the easy road when the right road was harder. She paused. Don't take it now. Harold looked at the settlement letter. Then he looked at Grace. Turn it down, he said. That night, Harold was in the kitchen washing dishes when a pressure settled across his chest. Not sharp, not sudden, just a weight, like someone pressing a palm against his sternum. He gripped the edge of the counter and held still. It lasted about 15 seconds. Then it eased. Harold exhaled and turned the water back on. Nina was in the doorway. You okay? She asked. Fine. Stood up too fast. Mina studied him. She was a registered nurse. She'd spent enough shifts in the cardiac ward to know what she'd just watched. But she also knew Harold. Pushing him the night before the biggest morning of his life would only make things harder. Drink some water, she said. I will. She didn't bring it up, but she didn't stop watching him either. The morning of the trial, Harold was up at 4:30 because Harold was always up at 4:30. He put on his Navy suit, the same one from the Salvation Army he'd worn to every custody hearing and every graduation. Still too wide across the shoulders. Grace was already at the table with her notes, dressed and ready. Nina came downstairs in a dark blouse and pressed slacks. Lily wore her teaching cardigan and carried a folder of photographs. They drove in Nina's car. Nobody said much. Grace reviewed her notes in the front seat. Lily held the photo folder in her lap. Harold sat in the back and looked out the window at the town going by. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building across town. They parked on the street and walked toward the front steps. Harold stopped. The hallway inside was full of people. He could see them through the glass doors, standing along both walls, sitting on the wooden benches, filling the corridor. Faces he knew, the neighbor with her written list, the diner cook, teachers from the school, parents of students. A woman whose leaky faucet Harold had fixed one Saturday afternoon because she mentioned it at church. A man whose son used to sit in the custodial closet doing long division while Harold sorted supplies. The former principal's widow standing near the courtroom door with the authorization letter in her hand. Harold stood on the front steps and looked through the glass at all of them. "What are all these people doing here?" he said. Grace put her hand on his arm. "They came for you." Harold walked through the hallway and people reached for him, not grabbing, just touching. A hand on his shoulder, a nod, a whispered, "We're with you." He didn't know what to do with any of it, so he just nodded back and kept walking. The courtroom was smaller than he expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of benches already filling up. Harold sat at the defense table in his navy suit. Grace sat beside him with a stack of folders and Harold's spiral notebooks. Nina and Lily sat in the first row behind the railing. Across the aisle, Calloway's attorney was already at the plaintiff's table, a tall man in an expensive suit arranging papers. Calloway sat next to him, pressed shirt, hands folded, looking straight ahead. Harold looked at Calloway. Calloway didn't look back. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Harold's knees popped when he got up, and Grace glanced at him. "I'm fine," he said. The judge, a gray-haired woman with reading glasses, settled into her chair and opened the file. "This is a civil complaint filed by the school district against Harold Meeks, alleging misappropriation of district resources. Counsel, are both parties ready?" "Ready, Your Honor," Calloway's attorney said. Grace stood. "Ready, Your Honor." Harold watched her. She'd been a baby in a cardboard box, and now she was standing in a courtroom. Harold's throat tightened, and he looked down at his hands. Calloway's attorney went first. His name didn't matter. What mattered was the story he told. He stood in front of the judge and laid it out. Purchase orders spanning 2 decades. Tools, supplies, building materials ordered under Harold Meeks's name and never accounted for. $47,000 in district resources that vanished. He had dates. He had numbers. And he made it sound like Harold had been quietly robbing the school one supply order at a time. "This is not a case of a single lapse in judgment," the attorney said. "This is a pattern of systematic misuse of public resources by a trusted employee who exploited his access to school property for personal gain." Harold sat still. The words hit him one at a time, and each one landed somewhere heavy. Grace's turn came 40 minutes later, after Calloway's attorney called a district accountant to the stand to walk through the purchase orders. Grace stood up. Harold could see her hands. They were steady, but her right thumb was pressing against her index finger the way it did when she was nervous. She'd done that since she was little. Harold noticed, and he saw her take one breath before she spoke. "You've reviewed the purchase orders in question?" Grace asked the accountant. "I have. And these orders span approximately 2 decades. "That's correct. During that time, were these orders approved by anyone other than Mr. Meeks?" The accountant paused. "The orders were submitted under Mr. Meeks' name. That's not what I asked. Were they reviewed or approved by a supervisor, a principal, a district administrator? Standard procedure would require administrative approval." "Yes. And in the case of these specific orders, was that approval given?" "I would have to check the individual files." Grace picked up the authorization letter from the former principal's widow. "I have here a letter from the principal of the school, authorizing Mr. Meeks to use school facilities and resources for personal purposes during non-school hours. Signed and dated." She handed it to the judge. "Signed, would this constitute administrative approval?" "Objection," Calloway's attorney said. "That letter predates the majority of the alleged incidents. It establishes a pattern of authorized use," Grace said. "It also establishes that the school was fully aware of Mr. Meeks's activities and approved of them." The judge looked at the letter, then at Grace. "I'll allow it. Continue." Grace turned back to the accountant. "One more question. The purchase orders filed in the most recent period, after Mr. Meeks retired from his position, were those also submitted by Mr. Meeks? They bear his name and signature. Mr. Meeks retired from the school district. He has not been employed there since. How would a retired employee submit purchase orders?" The accountant opened his mouth and closed it. No further questions, Grace said. She sat down. Harold looked at her. She didn't look back, but her right thumb had stopped pressing. The judge called for witnesses. Grace had a list. The neighbor went first. She stood at the front of the courtroom in her church clothes and spoke clearly. I've been Harold's neighbor most of my adult life. That man has fixed everything on our street that ever broke. My porch railing, my kitchen faucet, the Garcia family's back fence, the church steps. He never charged anyone a cent. He's the most honest person I know. A former student came next, a woman in her 30s now. When I was in 3rd grade, my backpack strap broke. We couldn't afford a new one. Mr. Meeks fixed it with a piece of leather and a rivet. It broke again the next week and he fixed it again. This went on for the entire school year. Every Monday morning, my backpack was waiting for me on the hook outside his closet, strap fixed, ready to go. I didn't even have to ask after the first time. A retired teacher, a man who'd taught at the school for over 2 decades, stood and said Harold Meeks stayed at the school every Christmas Eve to set up the holiday play, hung lights, built the stage, painted the backdrop. He did it. Because the budget didn't cover a setup crew. And Harold said the kids deserved a real stage. He did it on his own time, every single year, and he never asked for overtime or recognition or anything at all. The courtroom was quiet after each one, not dramatic silence. Just the silence of people hearing something they already knew, confirmed. Then Grace called Nina to the stand. Nina walked up and sat down. She was calm. She'd spent enough time in hospital rooms to know how to hold herself steady when things were serious. Can you describe how you came to live with Harold Meeks? Grace asked. Nina folded her hands. My mother worked at the diner in town. Double shifts, 6 days a week. She couldn't afford after-school care, so every afternoon I went to Harold's custodial closet and did my homework there. He always had crackers for me, saltines. I ate them one at a time while he helped me with my math. And when your mother passed away, I was in the closet when they came to tell me. I was 5. Nobody came to pick me up. No family, no friends of my mother's. Harold was the only one there. He petitioned for custody that week. What was that transition like? Hard. I didn't talk for a week. I didn't eat. Harold made me eggs every morning because that's what my mother used to make. He got them wrong at first. He put too much butter and no milk. She paused. I taught him how to do it right. That was the first time I felt like maybe things could be okay. How would you describe Harold Meeks as a father? Nina looked at Harold. He was looking at his hands. He didn't just take me in, Nina said. He made sure I never felt alone again. Every afternoon, every evening, every morning, he was there. Not because he had to be, because he chose to be. Every single day. Grace nodded. Thank you. Then she called Lily. Lily walked to the stand the way she walked into her classroom every morning, shoulders back, hands at her sides. But Harold could see her jaw was tight. Can you tell the court how you came to live with Harold Meeks? Lily took a breath. I was 8. I was in a foster home where I was being hurt. I ran away and hid in the school basement. Harold found me at 6 in the morning. He brought me soup and a blanket. He sat on the floor a few feet away and didn't ask me any questions. He just waited. What happened after that? He called the police. My foster parents were arrested. I went to a new placement, but it didn't work. I wouldn't eat. I wouldn't talk. I kept asking for the janitor. She looked at the judge. Harold took me in. I didn't speak for 2 weeks. He never pushed me. He just made meals and washed my clothes and left the hallway light on because he figured out I was afraid of the dark. And then? One morning I walked into the kitchen and asked him if I could stay forever. He said yes. Lily's voice stayed level, but her eyes were bright. He was the first adult who ever asked me if I was okay and actually waited for the answer. Grace let the silence hold for a moment. Then she opened her folders. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence regarding the purchase orders central to this complaint. She laid it out piece by piece. Harold's spiral notebooks on one side, the district's official purchase orders on the other. She showed the early records matching perfectly. Then the divergence, starting when Calloway took over. She showed the inflated numbers. 12 gallons of floor wax ordered in Harold's notebooks, 30 in the district files. 4 ballast replaced, 18 on paper. She presented the Grayfield connection, a shell company registered to Calloway's brother-in-law. Every inflated order fulfilled by Grayfield at prices well above market rate. She showed the purchase orders dated after Harold's retirement, orders bearing his name and a signature that wasn't his, and she showed Lily's photographs, the crumbling hallways, the broken heaters, the jammed fire exits. A school where hundreds of thousands of maintenance dollars had been allocated and spent on paper, and none of it had gone into the building. The man sitting at this table, Grace said, kept a written record of every repair he made and every supply he ordered for over 3 decades. Those records are meticulous, consistent, and verifiable. The purchase orders filed under his name after his retirement are not his work. The signatures are not his signatures. And the company that received payment for supplies that were never delivered is owned by the family of the man who filed this lawsuit. She paused. Harold Meeks didn't steal from this school, he kept it standing. The judge looked at Grace, then at Calloway's attorney, who had been writing notes without looking up. "Mr. Meeks," the judge said, "would you like to make a statement?" Harold stood up. Grace touched his arm, and he patted her hand once and walked to the front. He stood at the witness stand and looked at the courtroom. All those faces. People he'd worked alongside, lived beside, fixed things for. 3 women in the front row who called him by 3 different names and all meant the same thing. "Your Honor," Harold said, "I'm not a lawyer, I'm a janitor. I mopped floors and fixed pipes and changed light bulbs for over 3 decades, and I was proud to do it." He paused. The courtroom was silent. "I didn't steal anything from that school. Everything I ordered went into the building. I kept records because I believe in doing a job right. And if you do a job right, you should be able to prove it." He looked at the 3 chairs behind the railing where his girls had been sitting. "People asked me why I'd take in children I couldn't afford. They said I didn't have the money, the space, or the time. They were right about all of it. I didn't have any of those things." He straightened. "But you don't need money to raise children. You need presence. You need to show up. I showed up every day for those girls, and I showed up every day for that school, and I'll stand here and say that to anyone who asks." He gripped the railing. His knuckles went white. A pressure bloomed across his chest, the same one from the night before, but heavier. He held still. His vision blurred at the edges. He could feel his pulse in his neck. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Harold loosened his grip on the railing and straightened up. He blinked twice and looked at the judge. "That's all I have to say," he said. He walked back to the table. Grace was watching him with sharp eyes. Nina, in the front row, had gone very still. She'd seen it. She knew exactly what she'd just seen. Harold sat down and put his hands in his lap so nobody could see them shaking. The judge removed her glasses and looked at both tables for a long moment. Then she said, "I'd like to see both attorneys at the bench." The judge spoke quietly with both attorneys for several minutes. Harold couldn't hear what they were saying. Grace stood at the bench with her hands clasped in front of her. Calloway's attorney was shaking his head. When they returned to their tables, the judge looked at the courtroom. "Before I hear closing arguments, I want to note that the evidence presented today raises serious questions about the integrity of the district's financial records. I am ordering that all materials submitted by both parties be preserved for independent review." She looked at Calloway's attorney. "Proceed." Calloway's attorney stood. His closing was brief. He repeated the purchase order numbers, the dollar amounts, the pattern of alleged misuse. He did not address the forged signatures, the Grayfield connection, or the photographs. He spoke for 4 minutes and sat down. Grace stood. She didn't bring notes. She'd had them on the table all morning, but when the time came, she left them there. "Your Honor," she said, "I'm going to keep this simple because the man I'm defending is a simple man. He'd want me to say that. He'd say it himself. He's a janitor. He fixes things. That's how he's always described himself, and that's exactly what he's always done." She turned slightly so she could see both the judge and the courtroom. Harold Meeks earned roughly $400,000 over his entire career, 3 decades of mopping floors, fixing pipes, replacing light bulbs, patching roofs. That money, almost all of it, went to raising 3 children who had no one else in the world. She paused. He's the man who found a baby in a cardboard box on a gymnasium floor and took her home. Who took in a 5-year-old girl whose mother died and made sure she never felt alone? Who found a child hiding in a basement with bruises on her arms and gave her a family? Her voice was steady. Harold kept his eyes on his hands. Harold Meeks did not steal $47,000 from the school district. He couldn't have. He never had $47,000. He had a 2-bedroom house, a bus pass, and a closet full of spiral notebooks. What he did have, he gave away. Every dollar, every hour, every weekend he spent painting hallways and fixing heaters and building stages for school plays that no one budgeted for. She picked up one of Harold's notebooks from the table and held it up. This is a record of 34 years of honest work. Every entry in Harold's own handwriting. Every repair, every supply order, every light bulb changed. These notebooks match the district's records perfectly for 2 decades. Then a new superintendent arrived, and the numbers stopped matching because someone started changing them. She set the notebook down. The purchase orders filed under Harold's name after his retirement are forgeries. The company that received payment for supplies that were never delivered is owned by the superintendent's brother-in-law. The $340,000 that should have gone into maintaining a public school, a school where children sit in classrooms with broken heaters and cracked sinks and jammed fire exits, went into the pockets of the man who filed this lawsuit. Grace looked at the judge. Harold Meeks didn't steal from this school. He gave it everything he had. He gave us everything he had. She stopped. Some of those years, that was almost nothing. It was always enough. She sat down. Harold felt her hand find his under the table and squeeze once. The courtroom was quiet. The judge took her glasses off and set them on the bench. She looked at the papers in front of her for a long time. In the matter of the school district versus Harold Meeks, she said, the complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Harold didn't move. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am ordering an immediate independent audit of the school district's maintenance accounts for the last 3 fiscal cycles. All purchase orders, vendor contracts, and payment records are to be preserved and made available to auditors within 14 days. She looked directly at Calloway. This court takes very seriously any evidence of financial misconduct involving public funds. Calloway's attorney gathered his papers without looking up. Calloway stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without a word. He didn't look at Harold. He didn't look at anyone. Harold sat at the defense table and stared at the wood grain. Grace squeezed his hand again. Harold, she said, it's over. We won. He nodded. He opened his mouth to say something and couldn't. Nina and Lily came through the railing. Nina hugged him first, then Lily. Then Grace. Harold stood in the middle of his 3 girls in the courtroom where they'd just defended him and pressed his face against the top of Grace's head and held on. Outside, the hallway was still full. People applauded when Harold came through the courtroom doors, and he looked so uncomfortable that Grace had to put her hand on his back to keep him moving. The neighbor grabbed his arm. I told you they'd see. The diner cook shook his hand and said, pancakes are on me this Sunday, all 4 of you. The former principal's widow held his hand in both of hers and didn't say anything at all. She didn't need to. Harold moved through the crowd the way he'd always moved through the world, quietly, a little stooped, not quite sure what to do with the attention. At the courthouse steps, he stopped and looked back at the building. All that time, he said quietly, and that's the first time I've been in a courtroom for myself. Grace heard him. You did good in there. I didn't do anything. You did everything, Harold. A long time ago. Today was just the paperwork. Within a week, Calloway was suspended without pay. The district announced an investigation. Within a month, the audit confirmed what Grace had laid out in court. Over $340,000 in inflated purchase orders, routed through a shell company, approved by Calloway. Criminal charges were filed by the county prosecutor. Calloway's brother-in-law cooperated. Harold followed the news from his kitchen table and didn't say much about it. The night after the trial, Nina found Harold in the kitchen at 10 o'clock, standing at the sink, gripping the counter. How long? She asked. Harold didn't pretend he didn't know what she meant. A few months. The chest pain. It comes and goes. Harold. He turned around. Nina was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed and her nurse face on. The one that didn't leave room for nonsense. How many episodes? 4, maybe 5. Duration, 10, 15 seconds. Pressure, not sharp. Shortness of breath. Sometimes, dizziness. Once, Nina looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at him. You're going to a doctor. Tomorrow. Nina, tomorrow, Harold. He leaned against the counter. I didn't want you girls worrying about me. You had enough going on. Nina walked across the kitchen and stood in front of him. She was 27 now, a registered nurse who worked double shifts at the county hospital and drove 4 hours without stopping because Harold called and sounded worried. She looked him in the eyes. Our lives started because you worried about us, she said. Every one of us is alive and standing because you worried enough to pick up a baby and take in a 5-year-old and go down to a basement with soup and a blanket. You worried about us every single day, so you don't get to tell us not to worry about you. Harold looked at her. Then he looked at the floor. Tomorrow, he said. The doctor's appointment was at 9 in the morning. Nina drove. Grace sat in the waiting room. Lily joined them after her first class let out. The doctor ran tests. EKG, blood work, stress test. He came back with results that afternoon. Mild angina, he said, manageable with medication and some lifestyle changes. We'll want to monitor you, but it's treatable. You should have come in sooner. I've been busy, Harold said. The doctor looked at the 3 women sitting in a row along the wall of the exam room. Busy doing what? Being stubborn, Nina said. Harold took the prescription. He agreed to come back for follow-ups. He agreed to take the medication. When they got to the car, Grace handed him a pill organizer, the weekly kind with compartments for each day. Where did you get this? Harold asked. I bought it last week, Grace said. I had a feeling. 3 months later, the school renovation began. The audit recovered the misappropriated funds, and the district allocated them to the building they should have gone to in the first place. Contractors came in, new heating systems, fresh paint, repaired floors, working plumbing. Lily watched from her classroom as they replaced the heater that had been broken since November. She taught her 3rd graders that afternoon in a room that was warm for the first time all winter. Grace went back to the city. She didn't take the corporate interviews. She took a position with a legal aid office, handling cases for people who couldn't afford attorneys. She called Harold every Sunday evening. How's the medication, she'd asked. I'm taking it. All of it. All of it, Gracie. And you're eating? 3 meals a day. That's new. Nina came home every other weekend. She'd check his blood pressure, open the pill organizer to make sure the right compartments were empty, and then sit at the kitchen table and drink coffee with him for an hour without saying much. Harold liked those mornings best. Lily brought her class to visit Harold in the spring. 23rd graders walked single file through the renovated hallways, and Lily stopped them at the custodial closet. This is where Mr. Meeks used to work, she told them. He took care of this whole building. A boy in the front row looked up at Harold. Did you really live here? I didn't live here, Harold said, but I spent more time here than most people spend at home. My mom says you're a hero. Harold looked at Lily. She was smiling. I'm just a janitor, Harold said. I fix things. In June, the school board held a ceremony. They'd voted unanimously to name the renovated gymnasium after Harold. He found out when Lily handed him an invitation at Sunday dinner. Absolutely not, Harold said. It's already decided, Lily said. I don't want my name on a building. It's on a plaque, Grace said. A small one. By the door. I don't want my name on a plaque either. Too late, Nina said. They already made it. The ceremony was on a Saturday morning. Harold wore his navy suit. The gymnasium was full. The floor had been resanded and refinished, the crack filled in and polished smooth. New lighting, a fresh coat of paint on the walls, and by the main entrance a brass plaque about the size of a hardcover book, Harold Meeks Gymnasium, dedicated to the man who kept this building standing. Harold stood in front of it and read it 3 times. Then he looked at the gymnasium floor, and his mind went back to a morning a long time ago. 4:30 a.m. Flashlight in hand, a baby crying in the dark. He turned to the crowd, most of whom were waiting for him to say something. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then said, Thank you. I don't know what else to say. Thank you. The crowd clapped. Harold stepped away from the plaque and let the girls surround him, and that was that. Sunday dinner. The kitchen table with 3 chairs. Grace in the oak chair, Nina in the metal folding chair, Lily in the blue wooden stool. Harold at the head of the table, which wasn't really the head because the table was round, but the girls had always left that spot for him. Lily had cooked roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Harold had 2 helpings because Nina was watching, and Nina had made it clear that 2 helpings were the new minimum. After dinner, Grace washed the dishes. Nina dried. Lily put them away. Harold sat at the table and watched them move around the kitchen the way they'd been doing since they were old enough to reach the counter. Grace set the last plate in the cabinet and turned around. "You're quiet tonight." "I'm always quiet, quieter than usual." She sat down. "What are you thinking about?" Harold looked at the 3 chairs. The oak one from a garage sale, the metal one from the school cafeteria, the blue stool Lily had painted when she was 12. 3 chairs he'd collected one at a time, over a long stretch of days that went by faster than he'd expected. He looked at Grace, then Nina, then Lily. "I was just thinking," he said. "It turned out all right." Grace smiled. Nina looked down at her coffee. Lily reached across the table and put her hand on top of Harold's. They sat like that for a while. Nobody spoke. The kitchen light hummed overhead, the same ballast Harold had finally gotten around to replacing. Outside, the school sat quiet at the end of the street, lights off, a brass plaque catching the last of the evening sun.